Martin Scorsese is one of the greatest filmmakers of all time. I am simply in awe of him on multiple fronts. In particular, the incredible longevity of his career, which began in the late 1960s and is still going today, unmatched by anybody of his generation, especially when you consider Scorsese still makes mainstream movies. He hasn't wandered off into the abyss making obscure stuff no one watches. And these movies are still brilliant, they're still challenging. His style evolves as he evolves. His topics mature. He innovates with 3D like Hugo. He experiments with alternative movie genres. He's brave enough to follow up blockbuster crowd pleasers like The Wolf of Wall Street with a personal small religious movie. There is simply nobody on Scorsese's level. Spielberg perhaps comes close, but he always comes across to me as someone who's in the Hollywood crowd, inside looking out, whereas Scorsese, in his own words, is not a Hollywood director, he's an in spite of Hollywood director, still fighting to get projects made, still battling to get scripts greenlit. It boggles my mind that this guy is in his mid-80s and still juggling multiple film projects. People pray that their mental faculties are still working at that age, that they aren't being wheeled around in an old people's home, and yet this guy is headlining $200 million juggernaut films. I genuinely believe that we haven't quite grasped the legacy and brilliance of this man, and we won't until after he dies and tributes start pouring in and that huge gap in cinema is felt. I can envisage people going through his filmography thinking, holy moly, this guy directed all these movies? If you ignore maybe Boxcar Bertha and perhaps one or two of his early films he made when he was a student, I honestly think you have a strong case that Scorsese has never made a bad film. I mean, a person could bow out with what Scorsese made in the 70s and 80s and still be considered one of the Hollywood New Wave's finest filmmakers. But it's 2025 at the time of the making of this video, and still the most anticipation I have for an upcoming film is whatever Scorsese decides to do next. One complaint about Scorsese that really infuriates me is that same old tired claim that he only makes gangster movies. It's very irritating that you could take his body of work, his passion for the craft, his energy, his inventiveness, and reduce it to summarizing the man as a director of mob movies. I mean, first of all, how many mob movies has Scorsese actually made? There's Mean Streets, there's Goodfellas, there's Casino, and The Irishman. That's 4 films. Okay, maybe you want to include Gangs of New York and The Departed, but now we're kind of stretching it because these are more broad crime films, not concerned with the Italian-American mob, which is what Scorsese is often associated with. So I'll give you 6 films, but he's directed 26, 27 movies. So take away those 6 and we're still talking about a filmography of 20 films. Through maths alone, the argument that he makes only mob films is ridiculous. For context, he has 4 pure mob films, and yet he's directed 5 music documentaries. So he's done more music docs than mob films. So why don't we know him as that guy who makes music documentaries if we're going by numbers alone? The implication, really, is that he must be known as a director of mob movies because those very mob movies are so good it becomes impossible to detach them from him. If that's the case, then what's the problem? Why is it a bad thing, even if he just makes mob films again and again, if the films themselves are good? And he is an author who makes films about things he feels close to. He grew up in that lifestyle. Should we also complain about Spike Lee making movies about African Americans and racism? Should we complain about Wes Anderson's signature aesthetic? Or Woody Allen always making romantic films following middle-class neurotic New Yorkers? That's who they are. That's what they know. That's the character of their movies. It's called having a style, being an author. What does Scorsese have to do? Take on a Marvel project to prove he has the goods? If his filmography was only his gangster films, Mean Streets, Goodfellas, Casino and The Irishman, and then he checked out, he'd surely go down as an amazing film director. In fact, I would argue, when you factor in the amount of films he's made, rather than be a one-note director, Scorsese is actually the most versatile in Hollywood in terms of film genres. Apparently he doesn't make films about women, and yet Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore is a fantastic raw and real movie following the struggles of a single mother. Taxi Driver is a gritty psychological drama. New York, New York is a musical. Raging Bull is a biopic of an unstable boxer. The King of Comedy and After Hours are dark screwball comedies. The Color of Money is a sequel. The Last Temptation is a risky religious movie. Cape Fear is a Hitchcock throwback updated for modern brutal times. The Age of Innocence is a period romance. Kundun is a Dalai Lama biopic. Bringing Out the Dead is a psychological thriller following an exhausted ambulance driver, and, by the way, is perhaps Scorsese's most underrated film. The Aviator is a Howard Hughes biopic. Shutter Island is a popcorn mystery thriller. Hugo is a kids' film. The Wolf of Wall Street is a sex, drugs and rock and roll caper. Silence is another religious film. And Killers of the Flower Moon is a period drama that could be called something of a western. Where on earth does anyone get off reducing all of that to saying he only makes gangster movies? It's ridiculous. And then consider Scorsese's work beyond feature-length movies. He has an extensive and varied body of work that spans several forms of media and genres, which includes documentaries that he squeezes in between his films, like The Last Waltz, No Direction Home, Pretend It's a City, Public Speaking, George Harrison Living in the Material World, Italian American, and A Personal Journey with Martin Scorsese through American movies, which is a film lover's guide through American cinema. He's also directed and produced television shows like Boardwalk Empire and Vinyl. He's also made several short films, ignoring commercials for the likes of Chanel or Apple. Some good ones are The Big Shave he did in the 1960s, that was a student film that is considered an allegory of the Vietnam War, and Life Lessons, which is a fantastic little film as part of the anthology film New York Stories, which he did with Woody Allen and Francis Ford Coppola, which follows a troubled, jealous artist unable to paint days before a scheduled gallery exhibition of his work. Alfred Hitchcock fans will love a 10-minute film he did called The Key to Reserva, which is basically an advert, but the overall gist is that it's a comedy where Scorsese has found an unfinished Hitchcock screenplay and he tries to film it. And the fake film he creates is legitimately good. It really does feel like a Hitchcock film. Scorsese is also deeply committed to film preservation, creating the Film Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to restoring and preserving world cinema, and he's also helped restore films from directors like Fellini, Powell and Pressburger, and other films from neglected film cultures such as African or Indian. Scorsese is also an academic who has taught other veteran film directors like Spike Lee and Oliver Stone, and he's written essays, taught classes, lectured, even put himself in the crosshairs of many Hollywood folk, like with that article he wrote years back criticizing Marvel movies. And he even does acting roles from time to time. He even starred in an Akira Kurosawa movie. The guy is a machine whose passion for cinema is matched by the actual tangible things he's done for the industry. And yet you're always hearing people complain about him, even if it's moaning about his movies. His recent ones were terrible. That acclaimed film is overrated. His Marvel complaints are an old man yelling at clouds, that kind of stuff. I think part of the reason why there's so many complaints about Scorsese is that he never really does the same thing twice. He's always changing it up. And what results is a filmmaker where we're unable to follow and gauge a pattern in his movies. It just goes from one thing to another, and we're never able to start one of his films comfortable, knowing to an extent what we're in for. Compare him to other authors. Tarantino, for example. You know with Quentin you're going to get a film set in a kind of Tarantino verse, where there'll be long drawn-out dialogue scenes, cartoonish violence, and snappy dialogue. That's Tarantino. We know why we watch and love his movies. David Fincher makes slow, methodical films which often follow cops in police procedurals or serial killers. In fact, Fincher is a great example because he's someone who did change it up and got a load of criticism for it. Mank threw a lot of people off. It was weird and different to what we're used to with Fincher. And then he made The Killer, which is like a parody of a Fincher movie, a deconstruction of the archetype hitman movie, which got a lot of criticisms from fans. Those criticisms he's opened himself up to would previously not exist and now do because his patterns have been changed up and disrupted. Fans are unsure because they're now in uncharted territory, and many are wishing, I just wish he goes back to making classic Fincher movies, and yet ironically pushing for him to try something new when he's been doing just that. With Scorsese, we're unable to get used to a style. He'll give us a bombastic, in-your-face thriller with Cape Fear, and then switch style to a sweeping operatic prose with The Age of Innocence. We compare each Scorsese movie to what we assume to be essentially the benchmark for what we perceive a Scorsese movie to be. But that quintessential Scorsese movie that we're constantly comparing each of his films to doesn't exist. Some might think back to Goodfellas or Casino and are disappointed by, say, The Slower Irishman and other modern Scorsese movies. Like, why is The Irishman so slow? Why can't he do it like he did in Goodfellas? But between Goodfellas and The Irishman, you have all sorts of movies like Condemn and Cape Fear, and that's part of the issue. If I say I'm a fan of Scorsese movies, what does that even mean? Does that mean I like his wacky comedies like After Hours, or that I like his grittier gangster films? And Scorsese would have gained new fans in the 2000s making movies with Pretty Boy DiCaprio, The Departed winning Best Picture, and then he made a great thriller blockbuster in Shutter Island, then a children's movie which would have opened him up to even more new fans. Then he made his most popular and highest grossing movie ever in Wolf. I mean, think about it. If you're a middle-aged housewife who's been following Leonardo DiCaprio since Titanic, The Departed or Gangs of New York might not exactly be films for you. But Scorsese is like a charging snowball, getting all of these new fans attached to his films because of his variety. And then those same fans are the ones who complain about his films, because nothing new that he's making is like the film that they fell in love with. For a particular generation, The Wolf of Wall Street is the movie they know Scorsese for. You speak to a lot of people and they haven't actually seen Taxi Driver or Raging Bull or even Goodfellas. They don't know him as the director of those films. They just know him as the director of Wolf, and that's the benchmark by which subsequent Scorsese films are judged and ultimately compared to. Other older fans might know him for his quieter, introspective dramas like Taxi Driver, and maybe have become befuddled when Scorsese started making these loud, energetic movies in the 90s, like Goodfellas and Casino. When you think about it in that way, it becomes kind of hilarious. Because let's say your first Scorsese film, essentially Scorsese's debut, for you at least, is The Wolf of Wall Street. For a lot of people, that was their first Scorsese film. And then his next movie is wildly different. It's a quiet religious period movie, which, let's face it, most haven't even seen. And then it's The Irishman. Okay, yeah, maybe you know Scorsese made that famous gangster film Goodfellas. Didn't he make another one called Casino or Casino Royale or something? This new one should be good then. It should be a fast-paced crime film like Wolf of Wall Street was. But then, our poor hypothetical protagonist is blindsided that this movie is in fact a slow 3.5-hour film about an old man falling down in his hallway and reckoning with his morality. Wait, hold on, what happened to the guy who made the hilarious Wolf of Wall Street, which was bursting with colour and creativity? But the thing is, those who grew up with Scorsese and have been following his career will recognize the pattern between Mean Streets, Goodfellas, Casino and The Irishman. There is a connective tissue. There is growth there that I've spoken about elsewhere. And interestingly, regarding The Wolf of Wall Street, as I mentioned in my video on the film, it really does feel like Scorsese exhausted all of his narrative techniques with that movie, and after this began focusing on invisible directing. Anyway, it must have been a really strange experience being a Scorsese fan in the 1990s. You have this breakout film, essentially a comeback in Goodfellas, but then he does Cape Fear, then The Age of Innocence, then okay, we're back to mob cinema in Casino, but then we're following the Dalai Lama in Condemn, and then it's Bringing Out the Dead. He never quite seems to settle with one thing, to rest on his laurels. His filmography is varied, and because of this, each movie opens itself up to criticisms because each film opens itself up to different audiences along the way who are forever wanting him to make another movie like that one that they fell in love with, whichever one of Scorsese's 20 plus movies that may be. You may perceive yourself to be a Scorsese fan, but a person who traditionally loves a movie like The Age of Innocence might not like Cape Fear, or they might not like a movie like Casino. And if you don't like Casino, that's fine. If you don't like The Age of Innocence, that's fine. It doesn't mean these are bad films. It simply means we all have different tastes. It's like there is this idea of Scorsese that we have in our heads that does not match the real life thing. We see him as the director of Goodfellas and Casino, and for a lot of us, it doesn't go past that. We don't count all those little films in between, which are just as part of Scorsese as any of his gangster films. So we have to take those as part of him and his filmography. Just look at what he's got slated to come up. Home, Sinatra, the Hawaiian gangster film with The Rock, Midnight Vendetta. These are all wildly different projects. Take a step back and look at his career since The Wolf of Wall Street. None of these movies are anything like that film. If you spend your time complaining that he isn't doing what made him great, you're going to miss the greatness that's in front of your face, the greatness that is to come. So that's my little rant over. What do you make of Martin Scorsese, his gangster movies, and his non-crime filmography? Do you see him as a director of mob movies? Do you think he should only be directing mob movies? Let me know in the comment section below. Subscribe to the channel, and thanks for watching.